it is not at all given by the exam commission or anybody else that we cannot use our data and our validation material from any GS paper for that matter in any other GS paper. We can obviously always use any relevant fact or any relevant report or committee or commission or recommendation to substantiate our arguments, right? So this is going to be very easy for us to prepare once we have this in our hand, right? So my marks have drastically improved in this year in the GS3 paper. Last year I had around some 89 odd marks, and this year I have been able to secure 108 marks in the GS3 paper. This has not been a luck. I have focused on this paper. I somehow tried to improve the quality of answers that I was writing. I changed the way I used to write my answers, the structuring, the answer writing structuring that people talk about. There were certain changes that I made to that as well. So we'll talk about that, but I'm here to help you sort of remove this enigma around this paper and sort of crack the code and see what you can do to study and cover this paper well, how the notes should be formed, and what we can do to, get really high marks in this paper. It is very important. I'm going to go right from scratch because I would be assuming that many people are not very comfortable with, the mains thing, because some people just study for the prelims and they clear it and they end up studying right now. So you should know the pattern of your examination. You should know what questions appear when, and you should very well know the syllabus and the themes that are in your GS 1, 2 and 3 and 4. If I figured out that security rewards me with 48 questions and a higher number of marks in the GS 3 paper, I would spend a day on studying security rather than giving my time to, world history at 16 questions or post-independence year at just 10 questions. Also, GS3 was sort of a very daunting subject. I couldn't get my head around how to prepare all these things, but once I had this kind of a PYQ based approach to see the themes, it was easier for me to prepare. And then once I had that in hand, I prepared extensively on the validation material that I needed for each of these micro themes. And then I extensively practiced in putting those validated addition materials on paper when I used to practice my answer writing. Because you all obviously know that you just have around 70 odd days and it's not possible to cover everything. That's the reality, that's the harsh fact. But then if we can focus on areas that are often repeated, we can get disproportionately high marks for lesser efforts. Hello everybody, my name is Archit Dongre, and in this year's UPSC exam, I have secured All India Rank 3. So today, the purpose of this session is to deep dive into the mains preparation to sort of understand how to go about studying for the mains exam, especially with the given paucity of time and the nature of the examination, where we are expected to deliver content fast in the examination, and there is not much time really, to think about the question and sort of brainstorm there. So in that sense, the essence of delivering good content in the mains examination is to be prepared well in advance. So there is going to be a wide scope of things that we are going to discuss today, starting with how to analyze what we have to study. Basically, we can study what we want to, but we should know what we have to study, the important areas, the important themes, the micro themes that we must prioritize. Secondly, how should we go about studying them? Once we are aware of a certain micro theme, what is the way in which we should make our notes, or what is the way in which we should consume content? And thirdly, with the help of certain mock paper questions and their answers, and certain questions that I have written myself during the preparation as recently as 4 days just before my mains exam, I will be sharing with you guys, and we can sort of discuss about that and see how I have been able to improve the quality of my answer with the help of data, facts, diagrams. So that can somehow give you an idea of how to analyze a topic, how to prepare for the topic, and how to deliver that topic, which in my opinion is one of the main aspects of this exam, right? So just let's go over the mains paper, the distribution of the questions in the GS 1, 2, 3 and 4 papers. You can see that in GS 1, 255 questions, 245, 248 for 3 and 153 for GS 4. It's lesser because there are case studies, not many 10 markers there, but our main fundamental papers of GS 1, 2 and 3, which are of a similar nature, we have observed the trend that there are 10 markers and then 15 markers, another 10 questions, right? So it is very important. I'm going to go right from scratch because I would be assuming that many people are not very comfortable with the mains thing, because some people just study for the prelims and they clear it and they end up studying right now. So you should know the pattern of your examination. You should know what questions appear when, and you should very well know the syllabus and the themes that are in your GS 1, 2 and 3 and 4, right? So this is the broad amount of questions that are being asked. Okay? So let's proceed to see the important areas in which we are asked questions, right? So take a look at this. this is the distribution of questions across the themes as we know it, right? So UPSC has given us a very broad PDF document with a lot of points and words on what areas they are expected to ask questions, right? So we have sort of categorized them into syllabus points that we are very comfortable with. So you can see here art and culture. We've seen about 30 questions, right? Modern history, 32. World history, a meager 16, right? But we should still be prepared for it in the way that we have to prepare for it, right? There is no point in skipping out certain things. Like I said, since this data is in front of you, you now know what you want to prioritize on. So for example, I would personally give lesser time to modern world history, 16 questions. I would much rather study your economy with 73 questions, right? I would much rather study things that people are not very well prepared for. For example, science and tech, 40 questions. Security, 48 questions. And disaster management, agriculture being at 42 questions. Now just compare this. You have to study a single micro theme, agriculture, which rewards you with 42 questions. Security, not much syllabus in that, right? There is the preparation time it takes is lesser. You have very ready-made materials available, yet 48 questions asked in security. Every year we get that. So this is a sort of a broad distribution across subjects on what questions are being asked and how many questions are being asked, right? So we have to somehow look at the distribution of these questions and prioritize our areas that we want to focus on, right? For example, if I figured out that security rewards me with 48 questions and a higher number of marks in the GS3 paper, I would spend a day on studying security rather than giving my time to, world history at 16 questions or post-independence year at just 10 questions, right? So this is a sort of thing, we have the benefit of data in front of us. But let's suppose that you don't have this kind of a data in front of you, or you don't know how many questions are coming. You have to analyze the previous year questions and sort of see what areas are often repeated in each micro theme and each subject that is going to come for the mains exam. So that is somehow you'll get a broad idea and you know what to focus on in this mains attempt, right? Because you all obviously know that you just have around 70 odd days and it's not possible to cover everything. That's the reality, that's the harsh fact. But then if we can focus on areas that are often repeated, we can get disproportionately high marks for lesser efforts, right? So after seeing this, we'll just go into the details of the GS3 paper, right? So today I'm going to talk exclusively about the GS3 paper, the nature of this paper and how to go about it. So my marks have drastically improved in this year in the GS3 paper. Last year I had around some 89 odd marks, and this year I have been able to secure 108 marks in the GS3 paper. This has not been a luck. I have focused on this paper. I somehow tried to improve the quality of answers that I was writing. I changed the way I used to write my answers, the structuring, the answer writing structuring that people talk about. There were certain changes that I made to that as well. So we'll talk about that, but I'm here to help you sort of remove this enigma around this paper and sort of crack the code and see what you can do to study and cover this paper well, how the notes should be formed, and what we can do to get really high marks in this paper. Certain tips and tricks we can go into. So today we'll talk about the GS3 paper by dividing it into few parts, right? So the first part of the GS3 paper is obviously economics. The whole nature of this paper is sort of economical, right? GS3 is a slightly technical paper. It is different from GS2 in the sense that in GS3 you will have to sort of rely more on giving credibility to your points, right? If I say India is a very high producer of milk, it is acceptable. But then if I say it is a one of the highest producers and it produces around 24% of global milk production, this is a kind of statement as an examiner I would be really happy to see in a GS3 paper, because the nature of the paper is a sort of economical in nature, and data, fact, percentages, reports, especially your economic surveys, your budgets, they look really good in this paper. And I am sure that you will be rewarded with marks once you're able to sort of give credibility to your answers, right? So let's go into the economics trend analysis, right? You can see since there were 76 questions asked, huge number of micro themes here. But once we have this in front of us, we can take each topic and just go into it thoroughly, prepare our note, and then just practice answer writing on this. In fact, I think by having this in front of us, it makes our work so much more easier, because if I just say study economics, will be just like a headless chicken, right? So this sort of a nice, concise micro theme approach is a very good aid to studying economics. Okay, so let's look at the number of majority of questions that are being asked. This is surprising even for me. Food processing sector is the highest amount of questions have been asked from this particular part. On economics, it would seem very obvious to us that yaar, question should be asked on repo rate and like banking, but food processing is the highest asked portion. After that, a slightly economical topic, FDI, right? So we have FDI being asked second in line, right? Renewable energy, infrastructure, energy, construction works, investment models, inclusive growth with linked with sustainable development. Very, very favorable topics for the UPSC, favorite topics of the UPSC rather. Inclusion, financial inclusion, again linked with inclusive growth, balance of payment, right? Niti Aayog Planning Commission, again hydroelectricity, one of the higher questions are being asked from this topic. You can see hydroelectricity and then renewable energy. Both are kind of interlinked. So it's not as if the themes are huge. Many of the themes are very interconnected with themselves. This is why I say that GS3 is sort of a technical paper, because there are a huge amount of interlinkages that can be made, which is in fact a good thing or a bad thing, depends on how you prepare it, right? So if you're able to see this interlinkages and your notes are how they are going to be when I show you, I don't think there is going to be much of an issue in preparing this topic. In fact, you can use it to your advantage. For example, if a question is asked on renewable energy, I might as well just use my hydroelectricity validation material as well in this, as a point or as a diagram or as a data fact, right? So it's not in silos. These topics are extremely interconnected. For example, look at this topic, digitization of economy, right? This is very well in line with our Niti Aayog reports, AI for all, right? UPI systems. Niti Aayog talks about this a lot. There are a lot of Niti reports on these things, right? Urbanization, globalization, and globalization with your BOP. So a lot of interlinkages can be made, right? So for example, corporate social responsibility, I think it is very well connected to the topic of inclusive growth as well. So let us not make a preparation get into silos. Use these micro themes, prepare them well, and then try to interlink topics. It is not at all given by the exam commission or anybody else that we cannot use our data and our validation material from any GS paper for that matter in any other GS paper. We can obviously always use any relevant fact or any relevant report or committee or commission or recommendation to substantiate our arguments, right? So this is going to be very easy for us to prepare once we have this in our hand, right? And we can sort of go into it and in depth and see now how exactly, once we have this in front of us, to prepare those notes, right? So for me, in fact, also GS3 was sort of a very daunting subject. I couldn't get my head around how to prepare all these things, but once I had this kind of a PYQ based approach to see the themes, it was easier for me to prepare. And then once I had that in hand, I prepared extensively on the validation material that I needed for each of these micro themes. And then I extensively practiced in putting those validated addition materials on paper when I used to practice my answer writing, correct? So let's take a topic, for example, suppose I want to prepare GDP now from the economic part of the GS3 paper. I today decide that I want to prepare GDP. Now, how do I do it in the best manner possible so that I'm able to get the best from this topic in the mains examination and deliver good content, right? So we'll be taking GDP, right? So GDP to see how to make notes on GDP and then value addition, right? And then finally how to deliver, because I think 80% of your game on how to get good marks is on practicing delivery, which is your answer writing practice. Okay, so let's go into your GDP questions. So firstly, if I wanted to prepare this, I would open the previous year questions on this topic. Let's look at one question. Explain the difference between computing methodology of GDP before year 2015 and after the year 2015. right? So this gives us a sense that we have to know on how a particular economic concept, for example GDP, is calculated. Now just think about this, brainstorm. You know something of this nature is being asked in the UPSC exam. This can be very well true now for other topics as well, right? They could ask you, and they have asked this, how does NSO calculate unemployment? There is a current weekly status approach, usual status approach, right? So you should know how those are calculated and what are the changes that have been made to those type of calculations, because this gives us a sense of that thing. They can also very well ask you on other economic concepts like balance of payment. How do you calculate that? What are the ways to, sort of get an understanding into how balance of payment calculations are made? What is the significance of a current account deficit, capital account deficit? What is the significance of capital account or current account convertibility? What is the implication on a country? What does it mean? So once you look at the PYQ of a particular micro theme, you'll sort of get this idea that how questions on other themes which are equally important be faced. This can be true for your budget. What is a deficit? In fact, if you have given this 2024 prelims, there were calculations based on what is revenue deficit, primary deficit, right? So they can now ask a mains question, okay, you have done the OMR, this is the OMR paper, now you prelims paper, now just come and show us in writing, explain to us what is the significance of a revenue deficit. Primary deficit, if you are removing interest payment calculations, what is that telling us? So the implications, the calculations, and what are the broad ideas behind all these economic concepts like budget, BOP, unemployment, right? So this is a sort of idea that you'll get once you brainstorm the PYQs. So once you know the topic, look at the PYQs. Let's, for example, take the second PYQ here. Define potential GDP, explain its determinants. Again, explain its determinants is asking you to tell what it is, what are the calculations, like what is the formula for this, how do you calculate this. Here also, computing methodology, determinants, factors that have been inhibiting India from realizing. So an analysis into that. So not just an economic term, explain that term to us, tell us how it is calculated, if there were any changes in that calculation, what were those changes, and then tell us, give us an analysis, give us an opinion on what are the factors that are sort of inhibiting that thing or promoting that thing, and obviously it goes without saying that you will also have to put in your own dimensions as to how it can be made better, what are the difficulties, what are the government initiatives, so what are the best practices, which is an excellent way to conclude your answer, right? So we'll look into answer writing as well, but this is the sort of idea that you'll get. Do you agree with the view that steady GDP growth and low inflation have left the Indian economy in good shape? Give reasons to support your arguments. Again, this part is an analysis, and with the view that steady GDP growth and low inflation have left the Indian economy in good shape. This is again your opinion. So based on the data fact and the analysis that you will have done in your preparation time, you have to give your own arguments, right? So now we know an idea of how to study a topic, right? So for example, if you have a micro theme of GDP, we know that we have to study what it is, how it's calculated, what are the different analysis on that we can make, positives, negatives, whether GDP, no, just think about it. Now I can think of a question, whether is GDP a good indicator of development? It can be a good indicator of growth, but not necessarily development, right? It does not tell you what is the per capita income, right? It does not tell you if there is inequality or not. It just tells you the raw economic output in a year in a given area, right? So in that sense, there can be an analysis on whether GDP itself is a good way to, sort of judge the development aspects of a country. So this is something that you can think about, sort of project your own questions, and once you do that, you will kind of have gamed the UPSC and have an edge on that, right? So once we know this, now how do we prepare this? Okay, so let's look at certain notes that help us to prepare this topic. So GDP in front of us, right? Now, firstly, like I said, what is that term? What is that topic? What is that micro theme? We need an introduction on that. We need to know the definition of that, and we must be conceptually clear with that, right? So look at this. What is GDP? Total market value of all final goods and products, which is going to be important within a geographic bound area, regardless of nationality of individual or firm in a time period, right? So it can be a foreign national also earning in this country, in this geographical area, which will be added to our GDP. Who calculates? CSO. Then what are the changes made in GDP calculation? This is a sort of points that you can get. This is an analysis. This is a run through those things that you must know. What were the different advantages of adopting new computation methodology? So once you know what changes have been made, a question can be asked, how is it helpful? If you change something, there is some anticipation of good things going to happen, right? Otherwise, you would not change an existing system unless you expect something good to come out of it. So what are the various advantages? So GVA provides a better picture of GDP, which is one of the major things, right? So this is a sort of argument that you have to give. Economic reflection, policy relevance, right? So a 4 or 5 points, crisp points on the changes that were made. If a question is asked and if you deliver, I think it's going to be a great answer. You will have impressed the examiner, and it will take less effort for the examiner to check your answers. Because see, examiner knows what he's looking for. If he finds that in a copy, you will get your marks. Otherwise, if you try to beat around the bush, it will sort of irritate the examiner and we might end up losing marks, right? Again, so now not everything is hunky-dory. We have made some changes. We have anticipated good things. There are advantages, definitely. But then as a UPSC aspirant, we always have to be impartial and neutral, and we have to give both sides of the argument, right? So there are certain issues also, right? So the MCA'21 database, for example, could not capture all the companies. So only 36% of the active companies are there in the MCA database, right? So earlier there was an ASI survey, but now there is an MCA data 21 data that is being used. So there are certain leakages in that. So base year discrepancies, for example, 11-12 is a base year, might not capture rapid economic changes, because with technology, AI, etc., I anticipate the economic development to increase by many folds. So maybe this base year could give a base year effect of being very low, and we could have over projected our growth. So that could be one of the disadvantages, right? So inclusion of informal sector, like we know homemakers, people who go to graze their cattle, they are not actively captured by GDP methodology, right? So that is also not a non-productive work. It also contributes a lot. For example, homemakers, we can always give this as an issue, as a negative argument for GDP, that homemakers sort of enable us to, like our mothers, they help us to study and then go to work while they handle the household, which is a big responsibility. So in that sense, they are enabling us to contribute to the economy, so they must also be included in this calculation, but that is not being done, and many scholars also have spoken about it. So that can be one of the negatives, right? So we can give that in this issues pertaining to this thing wala argument. Okay, so apart from this, like I said, this included this year. What are the benefits of GDP, issues of GDP? Like, see, doesn't measure inequality, excludes non-market activities, quality of life is not measured, environmental pollution is not, captured in this, right? So there's a concept of green GDP now. So all these kind of things will sort of figure into this kind of a micro theme. So benefits, issues, positive, negatives, way forward for that matter. Other macroeconomic indicators are also something that we must study. Like I mentioned, budget, BOP, etc. So NDP, GNP, they might ask you what is this, how is it calculated? So these formulas are sometimes nice to be used in this paper. For example, like I said, GS3 is very technical in nature. It needs a shade of economics to sort of bring out the examiner and give you marks, right? So this, if you mention this, like if I was asked a question on what is GDP at market prices, I would write this formula as after my introduction, and I would just box it like this, just to bring out the visibility ki, okay, I know you want an economics answer, here is a formula, I know what I'm talking about. I would just label this as well, like this is investment, this is government expenditure, this is export, this is minus the import, like a nice schematic diagrammatic explanation of that formula to tell the examiner that I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know the formula, it's just not some words written. There is a logic and I'm a well-informed person and I know what I'm talking about. So this will sort of give him an impression that this answer is going to be substantiated with relevant arguments, right? So these formulas, if you can put in your answers, this is sort of a validation. So well and good. So you might get some rewards for that. Then since you talked that GDP might not capture everything, what are the alternatives to GDP? This is another dimension that we can think about, right? So alternative GDP can be HDI, GPI, gross national happiness. Like for example, Bhutan uses this a lot. So you can give that argument. Green GDP, like I mentioned, inclusive wealth index, right? So these are if I had to give that, if the question was asked on GDP, I explained positive, I give an introduction, I wrote those formula with a schematic diagram, I wrote positives, I wrote negatives, then I would just sort of draw a small, diagram. Now, the way I would do this is, in my answer is like when I'm coming towards the conclusion, what I would do is I would make alternatives to GDP like this, circle it, and just make arrows and write GNP, NNH, green GDP, right, as a flowchart diagram towards the end of my answer, so that I don't even take too much space. I just visually explain the argument, and at one glance you're able to understand this dimension, right? So this is also certain way of value adding to your answers. It can be very helpful. You can, but it'll only come with practice. So when we come to the delivery part, we can talk about how we can improve our answer writing on GS3 answers, right? So then potential GDP and different aspects of GDP are also captured here, right? So this is sort of how you will prepare your notes on GDP when you go to prepare that micro theme. Broadly explain it to you. It's not complicated. What is that thing? What is the formula? What does it imply? Then come to the analysis part. You will have the positives of that particular concept, negatives of that concept, few dimensions, interlinkages with the other part of the syllabus, right? Then you will have what are the alternatives. Then you will have what is the way forward, how we can improve that calculation, how we can improve those data collection aspects, how we can reduce the leakages in that, etc. Right? Then you will have a particular section where you will collect your data facts and validation material. For example, for GDP, I would collect what is the GDP of the country, what is the growth rate that is slated for India, what is the recent RBI comment on GDP or Ministry of Finance, what it talks about GDP, World Bank predictions, IMF predictions, etc. can also be quoted in the introduction or the conclusion part just to give credibility to your arguments, right? A few diagrams on GDP, that formula on GDP. So just a very holistic preparation, airtight, so that no dimension is missed out, because you will be asked questions on these things, and what they will not ask you very straightforward questions as in what is GDP, explain. No, they'll ask you GDP blah blah blah, but it is not an adequate capture of the development of a country, or GDP is such and such, but green GDP is effectively now in news and is very relevant, so explain what are the benefits of that. So these kind of questions will be asked. You must be prepared for it. So right, so we'll prepare dimensions, and this is how once we have these notes in hand and we revise them multiple times, we will then be very well equipped, right, to deliver content. So now once you've talked about the micro theme, we have prepared the micro theme, let's think about how we will write an answer. Okay, so just take a look at this question. One thing that I do when I read the question is I underline the keywords when I'm reading the question in the first instance, because this is one thing that I faced a lot when I used to practice, is that when you're giving the mains paper, you're sort of nervous. What you end up doing is you read one line and nothing goes in here. So you read one line over and over again compulsively. So we must avoid that. Try reading the question in one go, understanding carefully. A thing that you can do is to underline as you read, so that kind of you remember the keywords that you have to give the examiner, and you know that what is the demand of the question, so you don't go off track, right? For example, if I had to read this question in the context of heightened risks due to global concerns about economic policies and trade policy uncertainties, need for strengthening the levers of domestic growth, then I would circle this question. So this is a statement. The real question is this: discuss. Now, for example, if it was critically analyzed, then I know that I have to give a negative argument here as well, right? I will give a negative argument in discuss as well, but then I will, in critically analyze, there is a big scope for giving that argument of what are the negatives of that particular thing. So kind of understand the question. Don't spend 1.5, if this is a 10 marker, don't spend 1.5 page just explaining the context. That is the context for you to understand and sort of predict the demand of the question, right? So this is a discuss question, so it is very broad. You can't go very wrong here with the demand of the question. This is a basically a holistic coverage of the question being asked. So in discuss, what we will do is sort of give a context of the statement that they have given us, right? The context is heightened risk due to global concerns about economic and trade policies. So what are the global concerns? So any relevant and recent example on the global concerns and anything that you know about can be a relevant introduction. For example, Russia-Ukraine war, India-Pakistan conflict, right? China's actions in the South China Sea, Iran-Israel your conflict, okay? Israel-Palestine conflict. So anything of that nature which impacts the global economy is a valid introduction here. So you can prepare these introductions beforehand like we did in our notes, But then by giving a relevant introduction, we kind of bring the examiner up to date that yes, we have been aware of the current affairs and we sort of know what we're going to be talking about. So it's a good segue into your analytical arguments, the positive negatives that we're going to speak about. So it brings that kind of relevance to the answer. So here we have chosen to do in US-China trade war, right? Post the COVID disruptions, geo-economic fragmentation. I would box this term. See, because not everybody is very used to this. I'm not an economics student. I'm just an engineer, but still, I know the importance of keywords. Once you use technical terms and you sort of explain it in a sentence, it looks good. Especially in economics, if I were to use a nice economics term, it would kind of give that perception in my answer that this has a shade of economics and very relevant to GS3 paper, right? So, geo-economic fragmentation, protectionism, I would box this. Intensified global uncertainty for large emerging economies like India, blah, blah, blah. Okay? So, we have a nice, relevant, recent introduction to sort of go into the question that is being asked. Okay? So, what is the global uncertainties and what is their impact on India, right? Because it's discussed, now we are just giving point-wise arguments as to what is the global uncertainty. So, fragmentation of trade, right? Volatile capital flows. Now, look at the validation that is being done. This is the X factor that you need in your answer. Now, just think about, I write this answer, but I don't mention this point, right? I somehow don't write this part. Volatile capital flows, US Fed rate hikes have led to outflows from Indian market. This is just a statement, right? There is no, you're not telling the examiner that you have actually read this in depth. But then look at this point in this manner. US Fed rate hikes have led to 1.2 lakh crores outflows from Indian market for the year 2024, right? This sort of gives this answer, this point, that X factor. Now, I would go one step ahead and I would sort of write here as well where I got this data from. So, if you mention your sources, nothing like it. For example, if this was 1.0, I would just write, maybe for example, I don't know, but if I could write RBI report, something here, I've taken this data from RBI report, it gives a much more visually appealing element to your answer, right? So, volatile capital flows, supply chain is a good argument recently. China +1, this keyword. Another word that you can use is decoupling, delinking. So these type of nice keywords and name dropping, these type of words also add that X factor to your GS3, right? Post rising energy prices. So we have a lot of points and dimensions to cover here. You obviously will know all these things when you study for this. I will not go into the content part. Just look at the way the answer has been written. Like for example, I would box this part. It's a nice data fact to sort of tell the amount of depreciation in the currency that has taken place. WTO deadlock, for example, right? So once we have these kind of validation materials in hand, we must be used to using them in our answers regularly. Now, how do you do this? We have to write this answer, this type of questions, and keep answering them, practicing them in our answer writing, so that not just that we know our data fact validation material, we are habitual to purposely using it. Make an effort to write some kind of report or an example or a percentage or some kind of economic term or commission committee report in every point. Now, it's not going to be possible to do it in every single point, but the more you try, the better you get. So, towards the end, I think you will be very well equipped to do that kind of a initiative, right? So, I have done it myself, so I know that it's definitely possible. Again, a diagram is good. You can draw a diagram. I would personally also, if I had the time in the introduction part, I think a good argument is to I would sort of make a USA map. This is my South Africa. This is my Europe. This is India here. This is China. Okay? And maybe when we draw Africa here, sorry, my bad. If I draw your Middle East here and my Africa is here, then I would mark the global uncertainties region, like this Middle East area. Then I would draw this Russia-Ukraine. I would highlight this Russia-Ukraine part. I would highlight India-Pakistan part, South China Sea part, right? Trouble in Africa near this Gulf of Aden, etc. These places, Somalia, piracy, etc. This part, right? So I would draw the map with global uncertainties and then sort of make it one arrow. For example, India-Pakistan conflict, Israel-Palestine conflict, Israel-Iran conflict, right? So a nice visual depiction of the global uncertainties. Also, if you want to go one step ahead, and I think that will be a very good thing to do, is sort of You can make a small diagram here of showing the supply chains. Like you can draw an arrow here, say that oil exports, Indo-Pacific, 90% of trade by volume. So that kind of gives that, okay, there are global uncertainties. This person has shown the global uncertainties, but at the same time, he's been able to depict what is the economic implication also of that thing in a diagram. So for example, the supply chain aspect, for example, if I draw from Russia, Ukraine, the Black Sea part, I can write impacting wheat exports, impacting fertilizer exports. So that is a very relevant diagram that you can make. And I think that would be very good in your answer. So that is just me thinking out loud. But yeah, that is something that I would have done probably, right? So then we come to the need for strengthening domestic levers. You can write the need. They have done it in a simple manner. I would write positives of that, negatives of that, and then conclude my way forward, right? So there are points here. There are schemes mentioned. Make sure that when you use a keyword or a scheme, you kind of box it, because that kind of brings out the visual appeal like this. You kind of box your points and relevant arguments. So that kind of gives that visual appeal to the answer. And then conclude with a positive point. I see that they've said that becoming increasingly unpredictable and self-sustaining growth strategy, etc. But then we must also write something positive in the end, that yes, despite global uncertainties, our economy has shown that resilience. We must engage in other global forums like we have done in the Mineral Security Partnership, for example, and other aspects of like UN, for example, to control these conflicts so that trade and economy and protectionism is not there, but there are other aspects such as free and open lines of credit and trade, and the Indo-Pacific is open for everybody to sort of maritime navigation, right? So that kind of a positive ending on a positive note would, I think, be a better strategy, right? So we have seen this question. Now I would like to show you one of the questions that I had written when I was preparing for the mains. This is a question on GDP, right? So it says the various methods used to calculate GDP and the reasons for disparity between GVA and GDP, right? So like I did, this is an economics question. He asked the various methods. So now it's the various methods for GDP, reasons for disparity between GDP and GVA, right? Now I have to show him exactly that I know what GDP is. So here is a verbatim definition of GDP is, right? So total value, all final. I've underlined this point because it's very important. This is a technical term. Goods and services produced in the territory of India within a final fixed time period, usually 1 year. So three things have to be captured: a fixed time period, geographical territory area, and final goods and products, right? So I've sort of shown him that I know what GDP is. Then look at the part of the question, right? It said various methods. This was a keyword. This is a demand of the question. My heading is exactly taken from the question verbatim. So when the examiner reads this, he knows, okay, my question is being answered. It's not a vague heading. Make your headings also extremely relevant. Just pick them from the question. Please do not use new words. It sort of gives this idea that you have gone astray from the demand of the question. We have to stick to the demand. So use the terms given in the question itself. So methods used. Then there are, when you study your static, there is income methods. I use a flowchart kind of arrow-based method to sort of explain that topic. And this is the expenditure method, right? So in that there is a formula, like I mentioned. The formula I would have used. So I've mentioned the formula here, and now I've shown them with arrows what it means. So this is at one glance, you know that what this formula means, the various factors in that formula, right? How it's calculated. So capital, government expenditure, incomes. So you basically have shown how it's being calculated. Then your GVA method, right? Again, a schematic flowchart kind of approach to show that the value added is just being added, and then you show it with the formula or diagram. You explain it in short terms, and you explain it with the help of a diagram, right? And then the second part of the question was to show the disparity between GVA and GDP. Same exact heading, so that you know that I have given that part, and then you show with a formula. So I tried to do the best I could in that 7 minutes, but yeah. So I boxed this whatever I could think I thought was relevant, and then give my conclusion, right? So this is how you would go about economics. We have covered it broadly.